Good morning, fellow entrepreneurs and upstarts. Thank you for joining us today. Usually we talk about growing businesses and building brands, but today we are going to do something a little bit different. Today I'm going to bring on Olen, U.S. grants expert, to talk to us about applying for, obtaining, and fulfilling on a U.S. grant application. And here to tell us about what kinds of projects you may want to consider grants as an alternative funding source for is Olen. Welcome, Olen.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, what kinds of projects actually give us a little bit of your background first.
Okay. All right. As Tyler mentioned, my name is Olen, and I'm a former grants officer with the U.S. Government. I worked substantially in contracts and grants for the better part of 20 some odd years. I retired after 30 years of federal service. And my function was to review applicants to make sure they qualify. That's the first part. And it's a pretty detailed process, but most people will qualify in one form or another. It's just getting you qualified. That's the first step, because all grants officers right up front, when you submit a package, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to review your qualifications to make sure you actually qualify for a grant. And there's multiple different characters that we go through. Are you registered in all the right databases? Do you fit the right socioeconomic goals? Are you going after the right thing? Are you seeking it from the right federal agency, right? So there's multiple factors, and we look at all of those before we ever send it.
Before we go into those factors,
okay.
Can you give us an idea of how long this process can take?
It depends, really, and here's why. If you've already done a lot of the legwork and got yourself registered in the correct databases, and you already really kind of know what it is that you're seeking money for and what you're seeking money to do, it can be relatively short, a couple of weeks. But remember, the folks who are going to be reviewing your application, they have a specific date that they're looking for. But getting you up to speed and getting you qualified, we're looking at.
What kinds of grants have you seen awarded, and for what kinds of what category do these projects that are successfully awarded grants fall into?
That's a broad category. There's research and development. There's small business grants that will help folks get up and running, get a small business up and running. There's medical, there's environmental. As broad and lengthwise as the government operates, there's grants for pretty much just about everything. Agriculture, yeah.
So you mentioned R&D, small business. I would imagine there's education grants. And what about like public? I don't know what you would call them, like public works or like recreation. Is that a category of grant?
It is, but they don't necessarily fall into recreation unless it's through someplace like the Forest Service or something to that effect. Oftentimes, what we might look for is community type stuff in the recreation area, because not all communities are created equal. Like if you like to ski or snowboard, you're going to be looking at someplace that's going to have that during a seasonal operation, right?
Okay.
But so it's really oftentimes those specific grants are geographically narrowly tailored.
Now, because we're talking about grants as a source of funding, really, what kinds of small businesses and small business plans and ideas would qualify for a grant?
Okay, so you have to look at a grant money for a small business is not as restrictive as other grants. Say, for instance, anything environmental is going to be very narrowly tailored. But
Okay.
a small business, if you're just opening up a small business, the pretty much anything that's going to provide either a service, a supply, construction, those types of things to either the federal government or the community, or
Yeah.
and and they're for profit. The Small Business Administration's primary goal is to get small businesses up and running, but you only have a certain amount of time. You have to get your business to be successful, and it has to be within a time frame, and those depend on multiple factors, like if you're a woman owned, if you're a small 8A. So there's varying factors that contribute to Small Business Administration, and what it is you're doing. Now they're not going to approve a grant for small business if you're vague and ambiguous and you don't really you have to develop a business plan, and those are key to strategy.
And that's something that any small business owner should be doing already to
Correct.
set their business on the best path to success.
Correct.
So it really doesn't surprise me that a successful grant application would place a solid business plan as a top requirement for getting the grant. Um, so I know because some of our conversations that the government prioritizes projects that carry with it some sort of social benefit. Um, you had mentioned that a few times.
Yes.
What are the top socioeconomic goals of the government from the standpoint of someone who has been on the inside approving grants?
Okay. So let's look at this. You have to break it both down, socio and economic. There's multiple social goals that the government has an interest in improving or changing the course of, and the same thing with economic. There's historically, economically undeveloped areas. There's folks who just haven't had the amount of money, the value of money, the just the geographic location. Let's say, for instance, you want to build a regular play park in Nome, Alaska. Well, that's probably not gonna fly as well because let's face it, in Nome, Alaska, you're probably only going to get a few months of use out of that, right? But there are things that they would look at for Nome, Alaska. Um, and the socio is like underfunded people, like the natives, American Indians, historically black colleges or universities. It's the idea is to try to even out where things have not been even for so long, and in areas that things haven't been quite so uh, financially supported, if that makes sense.
Okay, makes sense.
And
Um,
I would like to cover just one more thing.
please.
I want to make sure that folks understand there really is no such thing as free money. The government is going. Whoever gives you money wants something in return. It can be political clout, or it can be the data that you get, or it can be some type of a goal that they've been wanting to. They want to reduce graffiti in this one area, so they create a skate park. So there are reasons that that they give this money away, but they want something in return. It's not just a gimme.
You mean that money doesn't grow on the government tree?
Right. Well, they have a printing press.
So, what? How big can these grants get?
They can get really large depending on what you're doing. A lot of it has to do with what specifically you're doing. They have more money for some things like defense. Defense is huge. I mean,
Wow.
if you look at the Department of Defense, they spend a tremendous amount of money, and as you know, things are getting rather dangerous and across the global spectrum, and so there's a lot of different things that the government is going to need money for. Um,
Are a lot of the grants that are awarded by the U.S. government in the defense sector?
Quite a few, actually.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest with you, Tyler. The truth of the matter is the government, they give out more money in those types of things, and grant money is there's a lot more of the grant money. And just one more clarification. A cooperative agreement falls within the scope of a grant. So, and
Okay.
we cover more of that in our courses.
I see. Um, what um, what kinds of grants have you seen in technology or even um, like food production?
I have seen agricultural grants where the Department of Agriculture will give away, well, not necessarily give away, they want partial investment from another source, which is typically you, and you can do trading kind, but they'll give away a very large greenhouse. In fact, there's a few folks I know that have received these extremely large um, greenhouses that they put up, and they're doing food production for local areas that have a lot of difficulty getting supply. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They're trying to assist in keeping the prices low and provide food items for folks that are there. Now, technology, there's a lot of it's called SBIR. It's basically it's Small Business Innovative Research,
Okay.
and there's a lot of that. They're doing things right now to track pretty much everything there is that goes through the supply system, from the time, like a coffee bean, it gets plucked from the tree to the time it gets consumed by the consumer by way of opening the container that the coffee bean was in. They're trying to find out. Over the years, many countries have grown a substantial amount of food and have not been able to either get it to market or get it to market on time, and that means before it spoils, and a lot of that has to do with we don't know where the needs are. So they're trying to figure out how much is consumed, how much is basically thrown away as waste. I mean, many restaurants, if the food isn't prepared and served within a certain amount of
Hmm.
time, just like your pool dates, it goes to waste. And so they're trying to prevent a lot of that.
I have heard that something in the order of 50% of our food gets thrown out
Correct.
in the U.S.
Yeah, and that's just in the U.S. And there's other countries but see, that's the other side. There's other places, and not just our country, but there's places right here in our own country where that money could be utilized, or those food items could be diverted and fill up some of the shortcomings.
It seems like a very expensive problem to be able
Yes,
to, and a good one to solve.
correct. Yeah, and that's a
So
technical.
yeah. Um, okay. How about energy production? Is that an area that you've seen grants be awarded in?
You know, energy is pretty much regulated. However, I have seen things in the way of solar and wind, and they're not the same solar. We typically refer to solar in the government eyes. Solar is typically sun generated, heat
Hmm.
generated, cold generated, because cold will also expand. So those items are mostly from the sun and light and that type of thing. And then there's wind generation, and they're working on other things, and I'm not really sure exactly. They've developed some other type of, like a hybrid that utilizes like both.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean,
If somebody was trying to introduce a new technology in the energy production sector, or like a new battery or a new solar type, technology, would um, getting a grant be a good avenue for them to explore?
It would, and the beauty of it is there's multiple sources of funding for that. You could look at, well, let's say I'm going to go right back to the Department of Defense because they always need different sources of energy depending on what part of the globe they're operating in. The local communities, you know, let's face it, the more independent we can become on energy, the more we can utilize our funds for other things.
Yeah.
And instead of pouring money into other countries for energy, if we can provide our own, but it has to be sustainable. You have to look at, and the government is going to look at that as well. Anytime you seek a grant, they're going to ask, well, is this sustainable? Are we going to be pouring more money into buying more batteries to make this happen, or are these batteries going to last a while? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So we've explored a pretty broad selection of uh, sectors that grants are being awarded in. Can you talk to us a little bit about the process of applying for a grant?
Sure. The first thing you have to do is you have to be qualified. So, all right, actually, let me back up because the first thing you really have to do is you have to make sure that you're registered in all the appropriate databases. You have to have the correct accounts. Um, you have to make sure that all those are linked. And then that's number one. Then number two, you have to know what type of grant are you looking for, and then you have to know where to go to look for that money. And there are ways that you can go to the right locations to look for the funds. And there are ways that you can narrow down your search so that you're not looking through millions and millions and millions of different types of announcements. But then there's also once you read the announcement for the grant, make sure that you don't parrot what the announcement says because they read that. They read
Common
that
mistake,
stuff.
huh?
Yep, common mistake. One of my functions as a grants officer was to eliminate you right off the bat. I mean, because that makes less work. And it's not because we're looking to eliminate you. It's just that if you haven't done all these things, we couldn't award to you anyways because they take too much time to do, right? So you have to do your part first, and then you do the application. Um, and so once you apply for it, then it takes time for the reviewers and evaluators to determine whether or not your proposal, your application meets the technical merits and whatever other type of criteria that they put in there.
Now, is there one singular agency that you're sending your grant application to, or can it be a selection of agencies?
Yeah, you're going to have to send it to. Okay, so let me put this in terms of individual type of applications. Each applicant is going to have their own specific outcome desire, right?
Okay.
And they're going to have to seek out the whatever single or multiple agencies that might fund them based on what they're attempting to achieve.
And
And
those agencies might be federal, state, or local. Is that correct?
they can be. The interesting part about a grant and slash cooperative agreement is that multiple agencies are going to look at, um, sometimes they're going to look at the same things, but they're going to look at it in a different way, right? Like, let's suppose that you're wanting to open up a small business, but you're wanting to open up a small business doing environmental work.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now you're going to be looking at multiple agencies for separate types of funding. You might be seeking the small business, opening up your own business through the Small Business Administration, but then you also might be seeking your first grant at the same time through some place that might need some environmental work done. the government, the Department of Defense needs environmental work done all the time. Um, and then you oftentimes, if it benefits a specific community or specific state or states, you can oftentimes do what's called sharing, cost sharing, and involve multiple entities in funding. Now, that's not to say that's the sole thing. Oftentimes, they expect you to provide the matching funds, and it's usually not 50-50. It's usually 75-25. That's been my experience. Now, that doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. But you can oftentimes trade in kind for that amount.
Okay. Well, so the whole the whole process of applying for a grant and establishing its mission, if you will, it sounds very nuanced and maybe difficult. Is it hard to apply for a grant?
The application process isn't difficult, but you do need some help moving through the system because it is most of the time people don't continue to start at the starting point that they did, like 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
As we move forward, the starting line moves forward as well because we expect some people to pretty much know these things. And so when you come to us, years ago, we would the federal government, we would sit down with you and assist you in getting up in the right systems. We would tell you, we would bring you in for classes, but now we don't do that. The federal government doesn't do that pretty much anymore. I mean, once in a while you'll find somebody that will, but for the most part, they expect you to already know where to be registered and how to do this stuff. And, they just don't have time because just like the government, or just like the private sector, the government is also trying to streamline and trim down their operation costs, right? And the more time they spend holding hands and helping folks, the more costly it becomes. Plus, it also can have the appearance of favoritism, at least in the worker bee section. They really don't want to have the appearance of I'm favoring you over so and so. So those are the types of things that they
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the opportunity to learn more about grants and their availability and how to successfully apply for one. I understand that you teach people how to do this. Where can people find you if they want to get some help from you?
Okay, so we run a program. It's through the U.S. Grants Academy, and we do a paid webinar every month, and it's $125, and we try to answer questions that you need an expert to tell you, and you can find more about this at the URL below, and I hope to see you there. It's a Q&A session most of the time. Sometimes I'll just give a lot of little nuggets that you can take with you and help. Sometimes folks need, all the training, and sometimes they don't need it all. Sometimes they just need a little help getting past some problem.
Certainly. The coaching and the hands-on direction pointing can
Yes.
help people navigate the process much
The
more
myriad,
efficiently.
yeah, and it's a myriad. It really is. There's a lot of stuff out there, and it's very difficult. That if you don't have somebody on your side, it makes it really tough. That's a fact.
Well, you seem like a good man to have on your side.
Yep, I hope so.
Thanks again, Olen, for coming on today.
Thanks, Tyler, for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime, we'll love to have you back.
All right, thank you, Tyler.
Well, that was really nice of Olen to gift us his time and tell us more about grants. Please follow the URL below to usgrantsacademy.com if you'd like to obtain his help on navigating the myriad process of thinking up a project and making that project check all the boxes for the government. So thank you for joining us again on another Upstarts TV episode. We will be back soon with more Olen and more business advice for you. Thanks for tuning in.